The Massachusetts sun beat down on Camp Edwards in the summer of 1943, turning the dusty training ground into an oven. Private James McCarthy wheeled his bicycle across the parade ground, drawing snickers from every direction. At 22 years old, Jim was lean and wiry, with sandy hair that refused to stay regulation short and green eyes that always seemed to be calculating something. He had arrived at boot camp 3 months earlier with that bicycle strapped to his duffel bag. It was a battered Schwinn his father had given him before the old man died, and Jim refused to let it go. The other soldiers thought he was crazy. Sergeant William Hodges, a bull of a man with a neck like a tree trunk, made it his personal mission to break Jim of what he called his bicycle obsession. Pull-ups, push-ups, rifle drills. Jim completed them all adequately, but never with the fire Hodges wanted to see. Instead, during every spare moment, Jim was tinkering with that bike in the corner of the barracks. He attached a makeshift sidecar made from scrap metal. He reinforced the frame with welded steel pipes. He even fitted it with wider tires he had traded for with a motor pool mechanic. The real trouble started when Jim submitted a formal request to his commanding officer, Captain Robert Chin. Chun was a second-generation Chinese-American from San Francisco, sharp as a tack and fair-minded. But even he had his limits. Jim stood at attention in Chen's office, the request form sitting on the desk between them like a live grenade. "What exactly am I looking at here, McCarthy?" Captain Chun asked, his finger tapping the paper. "Sir, it's a tactical proposal. I believe I can mount an M2 flamethrower on my bicycle and create a mobile assault unit capable of clearing fortified positions with unprecedented speed and maneuverability." Chun stared at him for a long moment. Then he did something Jim didn't expect. He laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but genuine amusement. "Son, this is the United States Army, not a county fair science exhibition. We have tanks. We have half-tracks. We have perfectly good infantry tactics that have worked since the Great War. Sir, with respect, those tactics get men killed. A bicycle is silent, fast, and can navigate terrain vehicles can't. If I can prove it works." The captain held up his hand. "McCarthy, I admire creativity. I really do. But I'm not going to authorize you to blow yourself up on government property." Request denied. That evening in the mess hall, word had spread about Jim's proposal. The ribbing was relentless. "Hey McCarthy, you gonna pedal your way to Berlin?" shouted Private Eddie Kowalski, a stocky kid from Detroit with more mouth than sense. "Maybe he'll ring his little bell and the Nazis will just surrender," added Corporal Mike Sullivan, a Boston native who had made it his mission to ride Jim since day one. Jim ate his gray meat and lumpy potatoes in silence, but inside, his mind was racing. He had studied every after-action report he could get his hands on from North Africa and the Pacific. He had read about Marines being cut down trying to cross open ground to reach Japanese bunkers. He had learned about entire platoons lost to fortified machine gun nests in Tunisia. There had to be a better way. Late that night, Jim sat on his bunk, sketching in a worn notebook by flashlight. He had always been good with his hands. Before the war, he had worked in his uncle's machine shop in Worcester, fixing engines and fabricating parts. He understood leverage, weight distribution, heat dissipation. The M2 flamethrower was a beast, nearly 70 pounds fully loaded. But if he could mount it on a reinforced frame, use the bicycle's momentum to stabilize the weapon, create a shield for the operator, "You're gonna get yourself killed with that nonsense," came a voice from the next bunk. Jim looked up to see Thomas Bradford, a quiet black soldier from Alabama who rarely spoke to anyone. Tom was older than most of the privates, maybe 30, with steady hands and sad eyes that had seen too much even before the war. "Maybe," Jim replied, "but sitting still gets you killed too." Tom was silent for a moment, then swung his legs out of bed and came to sit next to Jim. He looked at the sketches. "My daddy was a welder, worked the shipyards in Mobile. He showed me some things. This frame here, you're gonna want to triangulate the support beams, not just run them parallel. And this mount point, it'll torque under recoil. You need a gimbal system." Jim looked at him with new respect. "You really think it could work?" Tom shrugged. "I think you're either brilliant or insane. Maybe both. But if you're serious about this, you're gonna need help. And you're gonna need to stop asking for permission. For the first time since arriving at Camp Edwards, Jim smiled. The next 3 weeks became a covert operation within the camp itself. Jim and Tom worked in the shadows, literally. They waited until after lights out, then snuck to a forgotten corner of the motor pool where broken equipment went to die. Tom had befriended a supply sergeant who looked the other way for a carton of cigarettes. They scavenged parts from damaged Jeeps, reinforced the bicycle frame with steel tubing, and created a mounting system that could hold the flamethrower's weight while allowing for quick rotation. Jim designed a heat shield using spare armor plating from a scrapped half-track. Every night they worked, every morning they hid their progress under a tarp behind rusted oil drums. But secrets in an army camp never stay hidden for long. It was Sergeant Hodges who found them. He had been doing a midnight inspection, following up on reports of missing supplies, when he heard the sound of metal grinding against metal. He followed the noise straight to their workshop. What in the name of all that is holy do you two think you're doing? Jim and Tom snapped to attention, caught red-handed with welding torches and unauthorized equipment scattered around them. Hodges walked slowly around the modified bicycle, his face turning redder with each step. The flamethrower was mounted on a swivel platform, the fuel tanks redistributed for balance, the whole contraption looking like something out of a mad scientist's fever dream. "Sir, I can explain," Jim started. "Oh, you're going to explain, Private. You're going to explain to Captain Chun, to the MPs, and probably to a court-martial board. Do you have any idea how many regulations you've violated? Theft of government property, unauthorized modification of military equipment, working outside designated hours." Hodges continued his tirade, but something made him stop. He looked closer at the welding work, at the engineering, at the careful thought that had gone into every modification. "Does it work?" he asked quietly. Jim blinked. "Sir? I asked you a question, Private. Does it work?" "I don't know, sir. We haven't tested it yet. We need authorization to draw fuel and access to a range where—" Hodges held up his hand. "Tomorrow morning, 0500 hours. The old artillery range behind the west perimeter. I'll arrange for fuel and targets. But McCarthy, if this thing blows up, kills someone, or makes me look like a fool, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of this war peeling potatoes in Alaska. Understood?" "Yes, sir." The sergeant turned to leave, then paused. "And Bradford?" "Yes, Sergeant. Good work on those welds. Your daddy would be proud." The next morning arrived with a mixture of dread and excitement. Hodges had done more than just arrange for fuel. He had invited Captain Chin, 2 other officers, and half the platoon. Word had spread like wildfire. McCarthy's bicycle was finally getting its test. The old artillery range was pockmarked with craters and scarred earth. Hodges had set up a mock trench system using sandbags and wooden posts, approximating what they might face in Europe. The target was 75 yards away. Jim wheeled the bicycle to the starting line, his hands shaking slightly as he checked the fuel connections one last time. Tom stood beside him, making final adjustments to the mounting brackets. The crowd of soldiers formed a semicircle at a safe distance. The jeering had already started. $10 says he makes it 5 feet before the whole thing explodes," Kowalski announced loudly. "I'll take that bet. I say he doesn't even make it off the starting line," Sullivan added, drawing laughs from the others. Captain Chun stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Sergeant Hodges just looked tense. Jim mounted the bicycle, feeling the weight of the flamethrower and fuel tanks shift beneath him. It was heavier than he expected, harder to balance. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was insane. Then he thought about the reports he had read. The young Marines burned alive trying to reach Japanese positions. The infantry cut down crossing open ground. The soldiers screaming as machine gun fire tore through their ranks. He gripped the handlebars tighter. "Whenever you're ready, Private," Captain Chun called out. Jim pushed off, pedaling hard to build momentum. The bicycle wobbled dangerously under the weight, threatening to tip. Soldiers in the crowd laughed openly now. This was going to be a disaster. But then Jim found his balance, found his rhythm. The reinforced frame held steady. He picked up speed, heading straight for the mock trench line. At 50 yards, he reached for the flamethrower's ignition trigger. Nothing happened. The pilot light had gone out. The laughter from the crowd grew louder, mixed with groans from those who had bet on him. Jim circled back, his face burning with humiliation worse than any flamethrower could produce. Technical difficulties, McCarthy? Sullivan shouted. Maybe you need training wheels. Even some of the officers were smiling now, shaking their heads. Captain Chun looked disappointed. Sergeant Hodges just looked angry. Jim dismounted, checking the ignition system with shaking hands. Tom rushed over to help, but the damage was done. In the eyes of everyone watching, Jim McCarthy had just proven he was exactly what they thought. A delusional kid with a bicycle and a death wish. The crowd began to disperse, their laughter echoing across the range. Jim stood frozen, staring at the bicycle that had consumed his every waking moment for weeks. All that work, all those sleepless nights, and he had failed in front of everyone who mattered. Pack it up, McCarthy, Hodges barked. The circus is over. But Tom was still working, his fingers moving quickly over the ignition system. Wait, he muttered. Just wait a second. Private Bradford, I said pack it up. Tom ignored the order, something that could get him thrown in the stockade, especially for a black soldier in 1943. But his hands kept moving, tracing wires, checking connections. Then he found it. The ground wire came loose from the vibration. It just needs to be resoldered. 5 minutes, that's all. Captain Chun had stopped walking away. He turned back, studying the two soldiers with newfound interest. Hodges, give them 5 minutes. The sergeant looked like he wanted to argue, but Chen's tone left no room for discussion. The departing soldiers stopped, curious despite themselves. Sullivan and Kowalski exchanged glances. This was either going to be the biggest redemption or the most spectacular failure they had ever witnessed. Tom worked with steady precision, using a portable soldering iron he pulled from his pack. Jim held the frame steady, watching his friend's careful movements. In that moment, he realized Tom had as much riding on this as he did. Maybe more. The wire secured, Tom stepped back and nodded. Try it now. Jim mounted the bicycle again, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. No second chances after this. He pushed off, pedaling hard, building speed. The bicycle held steady, the modifications proving their worth. He aimed for the trench line, closer now, 40 yards, 30 yards. His thumb found the ignition trigger. This time, the pilot light caught. Jim squeezed the main trigger, and the world exploded in orange and black. A column of flame shot forward, 30 feet of liquid fire that arced through the air like a dragon's breath. It splashed into the mock trench, engulfing the sandbags in a rolling inferno. Jim pedaled parallel to the trench line, sweeping the flamethrower left and right, coating every inch of the target area. The silence from the watching soldiers was deafening. Jim made a sharp turn, the bicycle handling better than he had dared hope, and made a second pass. More fire, more coverage. Any enemy soldier in those trenches would have been incinerated in seconds. He completed the run, circled back, and stopped in front of Captain Chun. His hands were still shaking, but this time from adrenaline, not fear. The trenches continued to burn, black smoke rising into the Massachusetts sky. No one spoke. No one laughed. Sullivan's mouth hung open. Kowalski looked like he had just seen a magic trick he couldn't explain. Captain Chun walked slowly to the bicycle, examining it from every angle. He looked at the mounting system, the heat shields, the reinforced frame. Then he looked at Jim. How long would it take you to build 5 more of these? Sir? You heard me, Private. 5 more units. Can you do it? Tom and I, working full-time with proper resources, maybe 2 weeks. Sir, you've got 1 week. And McCarthy? Yes, sir? You just volunteered to train the riders and demonstrate this in front of General Mackenzie when he visits next month. If this works in combat conditions, it could save a lot of lives. If it fails, it's on you. Understood? Yes, sir. Understood, sir. Chun turned to address the assembled soldiers. Anyone laughing now? Because I don't hear it. What I see is innovation. What I see is 2 soldiers who refused to accept that our current tactics were good enough. That's the kind of thinking that wins wars. He looked directly at Sullivan and Kowalski. And anyone who gives McCarthy or Bradford grief about this answers to me personally. The crowd dispersed again, but this time the atmosphere had completely changed. Some soldiers approached to get a closer look at the bicycle. Others asked technical questions. A few even apologized for the mockery. If you made it this far, you're witnessing something special. This is about more than one man and a bicycle. It's about refusing to accept the way things have always been done. Hit that subscribe button because what happens next when Jim has to prove this works in real combat is going to blow your mind. Sergeant Hodges walked over, his expression still stern but with something else underneath. Respect, maybe, or at least acknowledgement. McCarthy, Bradford, report to the workshop at 0600 tomorrow. I'm assigning you a full team and priority access to supplies. And McCarthy? Yes, Sergeant? Don't make me regret this. As the crowd finally dispersed for real this time, Tom clapped Jim on the shoulder. Told you that frame would hold. Jim laughed, the tension of the past hour finally breaking. We did it, Tom. We actually did it. No, Tom corrected. We proved it could work. Now comes the hard part. Making it work when people are shooting back. The next week transformed Camp Edwards into a fever dream of welding sparks and sleepless nights. Captain Chun had been true to his word. Jim and Tom suddenly had access to the best mechanics, unlimited supplies, and a dedicated workspace. They built 6 units total, each one refined and improved from the last. But building the machines was the easy part. Finding soldiers crazy enough to ride them into simulated combat was harder. Chun assembled a volunteer unit. Besides Jim and Tom, there was Kowalski, who had apologized 3 times and begged to be included. A wiry kid from Montana named Dale Tucker who had grown up racing motorcycles. A former bicycle courier from New York named Samuel Chun, the captain's younger cousin. And finally, against all odds, Corporal Sullivan, who admitted he had underestimated McCarthy and wanted to prove he could adapt. Jim trained them relentlessly. Balance drills, speed runs, emergency dismounts, flamethrower operation under stress. They practiced until their legs burned and their hands blistered. Tom welded reinforcements whenever something broke, constantly improving the design based on field testing. General Howard Mackenzie arrived on a cold October morning with an entourage of colonels and a deep skepticism about what he had been told. He was old Army, a veteran of the Great War, a man who believed in artillery barrages and massed infantry assaults. Captain Chun had constructed an elaborate demonstration. A series of fortified positions, machine gun nests, trenches, and bunkers spread across half a mile of terrain. 50 yards of open ground separated the starting point from the first objective, the kind of killing field that had swallowed whole companies in France 25 years earlier. Gentlemen, Chun addressed the assembled officers, what you're about to see represents a new tactical doctrine. Speed, surprise, and overwhelming firepower delivered precisely where it's needed most. General Mackenzie lit a cigar. I'll believe it when I see it, Captain. Jim and his 5-man unit lined up on their flame bicycles, engines of war that still drew double takes from everyone who saw them. Jim's hands were steady now. He had done this run 100 times, but never with a general watching. Never with the possibility that this could actually change how the war was fought. The whistle blew. They launched forward as one unit, pedaling hard across open ground. In a real battle, this is where machine guns would have opened up, where mortars would have started falling. But they were fast, faster than running infantry, harder to hit than a slow-moving tank. Jim hit the first trench line at full speed. He triggered the flamethrower, washing the position in liquid fire. To his left, Tom did the same. To his right, Kowalski. The trenches erupted in flames. They didn't stop, didn't slow down. They rolled through the fire, the heat shields protecting them, and kept moving. Second position. A fortified bunker with a narrow firing slit. Tucker peeled off from the formation, circled around the side, and sent a stream of flame directly through the opening. In real combat, everyone inside would have been dead in seconds. Third position. A machine gun nest protected by sandbags and barbed wire. Sullivan and Samuel Chen hit it from 2 angles simultaneously, creating a crossfire of flame that left nowhere to hide. The entire demonstration took 4 minutes. 4 minutes to clear positions that would have taken a company of infantry an hour and cost dozens of lives. Jim circled back and stopped in front of the general, his bicycle still smoking, the smell of fuel and burnt earth hanging in the air. General Mackenzie had stopped smoking his cigar. He walked slowly through the burning positions, examining the thoroughness of the coverage, the tactical efficiency of the assault. When he returned, his expression had changed completely. "Captain Chun, how many of these units can you have operational in 30 days? "Sir, with proper resources and personnel, I can have 20 units trained and deployed. Make it 40. The invasion of France is coming, and I want these men on the first boats. This changes everything. This saves lives." He turned to Jim. "What's your name, son?" "Private James McCarthy, sir." "Not anymore. As of this moment, you're Sergeant McCarthy. You and your team are being transferred to a special operations unit. You'll train other soldiers, you'll refine these machines, and when we hit the beaches, you'll be there to prove this works where it matters most." Jim felt Tom's hand on his shoulder, felt the eyes of his team on him. Sullivan was grinning. Kowalski looked like he might cry. Tucker just gave a sharp nod of respect. But the general wasn't finished. He looked at Tom Bradford specifically, his expression serious. "Private Bradford, your technical expertise and engineering skill are exemplary. You're promoted to corporal. This army needs men who can think, who can build, who can innovate under pressure." Tom stood straighter, the weight of that recognition hitting him harder than any flamethrower blast. For a black soldier in 1943, every promotion was a battle in itself. The demonstration ended, but the real work was just beginning. Over the next month, Jim's unit became legendary. They trained 200 soldiers. They refined the bicycles until they were nearly indestructible. They developed tactics, communication systems, support protocols. And in June of 1944, when the invasion fleet gathered off the coast of Normandy, 40 flame bicycles were loaded onto landing craft. The English Channel was rough on June 6, 1944. Jim stood in the landing craft, gripping his flame bicycle as the boat pitched and rolled through the dark water. Around him, his team held their own machines, faces pale in the pre-dawn light. Tom, Kowalski, Tucker, Sullivan, Samuel Chun. They had become brothers over the past 8 months. The sound of naval guns was deafening, shells screaming overhead toward the French coast. Somewhere ahead, through the mist and smoke, was Omaha Beach. The ramp dropped. Chaos erupted instantly. Machine gun fire tore through the air, men falling before they even reached the water. Jim pushed his bicycle down the ramp, into chest-deep freezing water, and began pushing toward the beach. Bullets snapped past his head. Explosions threw up geysers of sand and water. This was nothing like training. Men were dying all around him. The beach was a slaughterhouse, bodies floating in the surf, the living trying desperately to reach the seawall 200 yards ahead. German bunkers on the bluffs overlooked everything, their fields of fire meticulously prepared. Jim's team made it to the beach, soaking wet, bike somehow intact. They took cover behind a destroyed Sherman tank, the metal hull still smoking. Captain Chun, now Major Chun, had made it ashore 50 yards to their left. He was screaming orders, trying to organize the surviving men. The plan had been elegant on paper. The flame bicycles would rush the bluffs, clear the bunkers, open paths for the infantry. But the plan assumed they could cross the beach. Right now, crossing 10 feet meant certain death. Tucker tried. He mounted his bicycle, started pedaling toward the bluffs. He made it 20 yards before a machine gun burst caught him. He went down hard, his bike crashing into the sand. Jim felt rage and terror in equal measure. This was supposed to work. This was supposed to save lives. Then Tom grabbed his arm, pointed to the right. There was a crater from a naval shell, and beyond it, a fold in the terrain, a depression that ran almost to the base of the bluffs. It would provide cover for maybe 60% of the approach. It was something. Jim signaled to Chun, got acknowledgement. Then he looked at his remaining team. Sullivan, Kowalski, Samuel, Tom. 4 men and 5 flame bicycles. We go together. We go fast. We don't stop for anything. Understood? They nodded, their faces grim but determined. On my mark. 3, 2, 1, go. They exploded from cover, pedaling like their lives depended on it because they did. Jim hit the crater, used it for cover, then burst out and into the depression. Machine gun fire chased them, kicking up sand inches from their wheels. Samuel took a round through his shoulder but kept pedaling, teeth gritted against the pain. They reached the base of the bluffs, protected momentarily by the angle of the slope. Above them, the German bunkers continued to pour fire onto the beach. Jim could hear officers screaming for their men to advance, but no one could move. The whole invasion was stalling right here. Tom pointed up the bluff. There was a narrow path, probably used by the Germans for resupply. It led directly to the first bunker. Jim didn't hesitate. He started pedaling uphill, legs burning, the flame bicycle protesting but holding together. The others followed. It was insane, riding bicycles up a cliff face under fire, but insanity was all they had left. A German soldier appeared at the bunker entrance, raising his rifle. Jim triggered the flamethrower first. The man disappeared in a column of fire, his screams mercifully brief. They reached the bunker. Jim circled to the firing slit, aimed inside, and unleashed hell. The flamethrower's fuel tank was half empty now, but there was enough. The bunker fell silent except for the sound of flames. 1 down, 7 more to go. What happened next became legend, though Jim himself barely remembered it. His team moved from bunker to bunker like avenging angels. Tom took the second position. Kowalski and Sullivan hit the third together. Samuel, wounded and pale, still managed to clear the fourth before collapsing. Jim's bicycle was shot to pieces by the time he reached the 7th bunker, the frame riddled with bullet holes, one tire completely blown out. But the flamethrower still worked. He pulled it free from the mounting, carried it the last 30 yards on foot, and finished the job. When the last bunker fell silent, Jim collapsed against a concrete wall, his lungs screaming for air. Below him, American soldiers were finally moving up the beach. The killing field was still deadly, but now there were paths, openings, hope. Major Chun found him an hour later. Jim was still sitting against that wall, Tom beside him. Sullivan and Kowalski had survived. Samuel was being evacuated, but the medics said he would make it. Tucker had not. You did it, McCarthy. You actually did it. Jim looked at the beach below, at the terrible cost of those few hours. We all did it, sir. Every man who set foot on that beach. But Chun was right. The flame bicycles had worked. Not perfectly, not without cost, but they had worked. In the months that followed, similar units would be deployed across Europe. Hundreds of bunkers cleared, thousands of lives saved because someone had been crazy enough to strap a flamethrower to a bicycle. Paris, France. September 1945. Jim McCarthy stood in a cafe on the left bank, watching the evening crowds celebrate the end of the war. He wore his dress uniform, sergeant stripes crisp and clean, a chest full of medals he rarely looked at. His hands, scarred from burns and shrapnel, wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Tom Bradford sat across from him, corporal stripes now replaced by staff sergeant insignia. They had survived 11 months of combat together, from Normandy through Belgium and into Germany. The flame bicycles had become legendary, featured in Stars and Stripes, studied by tactical officers, credited with saving countless lives during the liberation of Europe. But victory tasted bittersweet. You hear from Sullivan? Tom asked. Jim nodded. He's back in Boston working construction. Says he's never touching a bicycle again. They both smiled at that. Kowalski had returned to Detroit, married his sweetheart, opened a motorcycle repair shop. Samuel Chun had recovered from his wounds and was finishing college on the GI Bill. Tucker's family had received his medals at a ceremony in Montana that Jim had attended, standing beside the young man's mother as she wept. What about you? What's next? Tom asked. Jim pulled out a letter from his pocket, unfolded it carefully. It was from the War Department, an offer to join a new research division focused on innovative military technology. They wanted him to continue developing tactical solutions, to think beyond conventional warfare. They want me to build more things that kill people efficiently, Jim said quietly. I'm not sure that's who I want to be anymore. Tom was silent for a moment, then reached across the table. You didn't build something to kill people, Jim. You built something to save them. Every soldier who made it home because a bunker was cleared before they had to charge it, that's on you. Every family that got their son back, that's because you refused to accept the way things were. Jim looked at his friend, this man who had believed in a crazy idea when everyone else had laughed, who had soldered a wire at the exact moment when everything could have fallen apart, who had ridden into hell on a bicycle because someone needed to prove it could be done. Maybe you're right, Jim said finally. Maybe that's enough. They finished their coffee as the Paris sunset painted the sky orange and gold. Tomorrow, they would board ships for home. Tom would return to Alabama, though he had already received letters from northern universities interested in his engineering expertise. Jim would go back to Massachusetts, to a quiet life that suddenly seemed more appealing than any medal or commendation. The flame bicycles were already being decommissioned, consigned to museums and military archives. But the lesson remained. Sometimes the craziest ideas, the ones that make everyone laugh, are exactly what the world needs. Sometimes all it takes is refusing to accept no for an answer. And sometimes, history is changed by a stubborn kid with a bicycle and the courage to be different.